I can finally start my life over. The moment my notarized signature was stamped on our divorce settlement, my husband uttered those words with a bright and cheerful voice. On the coffee table in the living room lay the legal documents bearing both our signatures, with a single worn-out medication log placed quietly to the side. Sitting next to my husband was a young woman in a bright summer dress. Chloe, the woman my husband had chosen as his new life partner. She flashed a glamorous smile and gave me a slight nod. Her tone dripped with condescension. "You have worked so hard for a long time. Get some rest. I will be the one supporting him from now on." I did not scream. I did not cry out in tears or attack her. I simply stared in silence at the old medication log in the center of the table. "You have worked so hard for a long time." The two people sitting in front of me had absolutely no idea how superficial and completely disconnected from reality those words were. David looked at the divorce papers with a satisfied smile. His complexion was good, and he certainly did not look like a man suffering from a severe, incurable chronic illness. True to his former title of Vice President of Sales, he was still impeccably dressed and wore an expression full of unwavering confidence. That aura of a prosperous, successful older man was probably what had made Chloe fall for him. "You can finally be free from taking care of me," David said, acting as if he were a deeply compassionate man. "I am perfectly fine now. With Chloe here, I can easily get through the rest of my treatments." Hearing those words, my fingertips turned ice cold for a brief second. He can easily get through it. David genuinely believed that he had been fighting his illness all on his own. For 22 years, I had woven an invisible safety net throughout this entire house just to keep his life tethered to this world. Morning, noon, evening, and right before bed, calculating the exact timing for different types of medications to prevent severe side effects. Never overlooking the subtle signs of a midnight crisis, rubbing his back while simultaneously making the critical decision of whether or not to call 911. Working an exhausting schedule as a registered nurse at a major Chicago hospital while spending hours every year updating complex insurance paperwork, prior authorizations, and patient assistance programs. I carried all that weight alone, but David never thanked me. "Taking care of your husband is a wife's duty. You are an RN anyway. You are used to this kind of thing, right?" That was the phrase he threw at me year after year. I grabbed my purse and stood up. I did not demand alimony. I did not fight over the division of assets. I simply pointed at the medication log I had left on the table. "Just make sure to take that to your next doctor's appointment." David scoffed. "Chloe will take care of all that." Chloe nodded enthusiastically and gently touched his arm. "Yes, I will manage everything perfectly. Do not worry about a thing." I did not say another word. I simply turned my back to them in silence. My footsteps toward the front door felt miraculously light. Behind me, I could hear their cheerful laughter. It was the giddy sound of two people completely intoxicated by the expectation of a bright new life. When I opened the front door, the cool afternoon breeze brushed against my cheeks. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt the suffocating heavy air that had bound me for 22 years dissipate instantly. Walking toward the L train station, I pulled out my smartphone, opened my contacts, and dialed the familiar number of Chicago Memorial Hospital. After a few rings, the receptionist answered. "I am calling regarding the emergency contact and healthcare proxy registry for David Miller," I said. My voice was clear and unwavering as I stopped to look at the city skyline bathed in the sunset. "Effective immediately, I am terminating my status as a registered family member and medical power of attorney. Please direct all future emergency notifications and treatment consent forms to someone else." I could hear the receptionist inhale sharply on the other end of the line. Revoking a medical proxy is not a simple administrative update. In the treatment of a complex and intractable illness, it means completely severing the vital pipeline between the doctor and the patient. "Understood. I will inform his attending physician, Dr. Harrison, immediately." I hung up and let out a deep sigh. David did not know yet. He had no idea of the terrifying safety net he had just thrown away, the medication schedules, the clinic dates, the emergency protocols. His daily life had only functioned so smoothly because I was behind the scenes doing all the dirty work, adjusting everything, and meticulously keeping records. In 3 days, David would take his mistress to his regular monthly checkup. The moment he sat in the chair in that exam room, he would realize the horrific truth. The freedom he thought he had won was actually the act of cutting his own lifeline. Dragging a single suitcase, I walked up the stairs of an old apartment complex. It was a modest off-campus apartment in Lincoln Park, where my daughter Emily lived alone while attending university. When I rang the doorbell, the door opened immediately, revealing my daughter's worried face. "Mom." Emily looked at me and asked no questions. She silently took my luggage and ushered me inside. It was a small space, but it smelled warm and inviting. The moment I felt the air in her apartment, the heavy burden I had carried on my shoulders for 22 years finally slipped off. Sitting across from my daughter, who had brewed me a cup of hot chamomile tea, I wrapped both hands around the mug. The gentle heat transferred to my freezing fingertips. I tried to remember the last time someone had made a cup of tea just for me. For 22 years, my entire concept of time revolved exclusively around my husband's survival. Inside my purse was an old blue folder. It was different from the log I had left on the living room table with the divorce papers. This was my personal copy of his medical records. Without thinking, I pulled the folder out, flipping through the pages. My own cramped handwriting jumped out at me. Dates, times, body temperature, blood pressure, types and doses of medications, and minute changes in his physical condition. Slightly breathless in the middle of the night. Must confirm with Dr. Harrison at tomorrow's appointment. The tremors in his right hand are worse than yesterday. Possible side effect of the new medication: reduce sodium in his diet even further. He hates it. Must disguise the lack of salt with a thick herb broth. These were not just notes. They were a literal map of the life I had painstakingly stitched together, fraying my own nerves, just so my husband could wake up safe and breathe normally the next day. David genuinely believes he is a strong, independent man, a handsome and successful executive who refuses to be beaten by an illness and is loved by a beautiful young woman. But the only reason he could maintain that facade was because I stayed awake listening to his breathing patterns, neutralizing the signs of crisis before they happened, and coordinating with his doctors behind the scenes. Why did I endure such unreasonable treatment for so long? Because I did not want to rob my daughter of a father figure. And there was another reason. A promise I had made to his mother when she was gravely ill in her hospital bed, shortly after we got married. He is so proud and clumsy, but please never abandon him. Bound by the words of my sick mother-in-law holding my hand, I had made a firm resolution to support him to the bitter end, both as his wife and as a medical professional. But the moment that resolution shattered completely came suddenly. It happened 6 months ago. David complained of severe dizziness and nausea, and I rushed him to the ER in the middle of the night. After sitting by his side through a 4-hour IV infusion, I was driving back home, worried about how this would affect my upcoming night shift. David was leaning back in the passenger seat when his smartphone rang. The screen displayed the name Chloe. Without showing a hint of concern for me, he answered the phone in a bright, upbeat voice. "Oh, I just got a little tired and had a dizzy spell. I am a strong guy. I would never let an illness beat me. Let's go to that high-end steakhouse downtown you wanted to try," laughing happily. His profile showed no trace of the shadow of a deadly disease, and after hanging up, he offered not a single word of gratitude to me, the woman who had stayed awake all night by his side and was currently driving him home. At that precise moment, something inside me quietly but entirely crumbled to dust. This man does not see me as his wife, nor does he even see me as a human being who feels pain or exhaustion. He only sees me as a convenient medical device designed to keep him alive. "Mom." Emily's voice brought me back to reality. Emily looked at the blue folder in my hands and spoke softly but firmly. You do not have to throw your life away for Dad anymore. Her words were almost chillingly direct. Dad has absolutely no idea how much he is being protected. He needs to realize it, and he will only realize it once you are gone. In my daughter's eyes, I saw a mixture of quiet rage toward her father's vanity and deep compassion for me. I could not say anything. I simply gripped the teacup a little tighter. Someone had finally seen me. Someone who knew how long and lonely my battle had been was sitting right here. That night in Emily's apartment, I fell asleep without setting a single alarm clock for the first time in 22 years. I did not have to wake up startled by terror, hearing my husband shift in his sleep. I did not have to strain my ears to listen for the urgencies of a respiratory attack. I had completely forgotten how incredibly luxurious and comforting pure silence could be. When I woke up the next morning with the sunlight streaming through the window, there was not a single missed call from David on my smartphone. He had not realized it yet. He had no idea that in the house I had left behind, the specific pill packets he needed to take that morning were not carefully laid out on the table. He had no idea what combination of medications he was supposed to take. And above all, he had no idea of the fatal situation he was about to walk into at his monthly clinic visit. The hands of the clock ticked silently. The moment he would learn the truth was rapidly approaching. It was 7:30 in the morning. My body was still listening for phantom alarms. This was my first morning as a divorced woman in my daughter's apartment. Usually, this time was a battlefield. Taking David's blood pressure and temperature, calculating the exact sodium content of his breakfast, and preparing 5 different types of pills that had to be administered within 30 minutes after his meal. If I was even slightly late, he would get irritated and click his tongue at my incompetence. That was my life for 22 years. But right now, all that was in front of me was a piece of toast and a hot cup of coffee my daughter had made. I did not hear the sound of aluminum pill blisters popping. I did not hear my husband clicking his tongue. There was only the quiet, soft morning light bathing the small dining table. "Did you sleep well, Mom?" Emily asked, leaning over from the other side of the table. I nodded slowly, wrapping both hands around my coffee mug. Yes, I cannot remember the last time I woke up on such a quiet morning. Emily smiled happily and began eating her breakfast. That peaceful atmosphere was interrupted by the modest ring of my smartphone. The screen displayed a familiar local number. It was the specialty pharmacy located right across from Chicago Memorial Hospital, the one that had handled my husband's prescriptions for years. I hesitated for a moment, then stood up quietly, walked to the window, and answered the call. "Hello, this is Sarah." "Oh, Sarah, I am so sorry to call so early. It is Mary from the pharmacy." The voice on the other end belonged to Mary, a veteran pharmacist who sounded anxious. She was one of the few people who truly understood the complexity of my husband's medication regimen and had helped me manage it all these years. Actually, first thing this morning, a young woman claiming to be David's proxy came in to pick up his medications. Hearing those words, I instinctively closed my eyes. Chloe, my husband's new partner, had begun to play the role of his devoted nurse, but she did not have his medication log. Worse, she knew absolutely nothing about the dosage changes Dr. Harrison made last week. Mary's voice revealed clear confusion and a professional sense of dread. When I tried to explain the medication warnings to her, the woman just laughed and cut me off. Mary hesitated, sounding incredibly uncomfortable. She said, "My husband is almost completely cured, so I was told these are basically just vitamin supplements." An icy wind blew through my chest. Vitamin supplements. What my husband took every day were specialized potent suppressants that carried severe side effects. One wrong move could trigger a life-threatening medical crisis. That was exactly why I had frayed my nerves keeping meticulous daily records in my notebook. David had been lying to Chloe. He told her he was a strong man, on the verge of recovering perfect health, just to look cool in front of his younger mistress. He had completely hidden the severity of his incurable disease, passing it off as minor fatigue. And Chloe had blindly swallowed every lie built inside that house. "Sarah, this is incredibly dangerous. given David's current lab numbers, leaving his medication management to someone who takes it so lightly is. Her voice trembled slightly. It was the genuine terror of a healthcare professional watching a patient let go of their lifeline. Looking out at the city skyline, I spoke softly but firmly. Mary, actually, David and I finalized our divorce yesterday. I heard Mary gasp on the other end of the line. A long silence followed. I am no longer his wife, and yesterday, I instructed the hospital to remove me from his medical proxy and emergency contact lists. I paused, suppressing my emotions, and continued. He will most likely go to his regular appointment tomorrow afternoon with that woman. From now on, please direct all medication advice and side effect warnings to him and his new partner. Mary could not speak for a long moment. She knew me. She knew I was always the first one through the pharmacy doors every month. She knew that before she had to explain anything, I would tell her precisely. His nighttime palpitations increased this month. So, the doctor lowered this specific dose. She was the only person who had witnessed firsthand the 22 years of exhausting labor I endured behind the scenes to keep my husband alive. I see. When Mary managed to get the words out, her voice sounded heavy with emotion. I completely understand. I will delete your contact information from David's file immediately. Going forward, I will strictly instruct the patient directly. Sarah, you have truly worked so hard for so long. Please get some rest. It was not the superficial condescending phrase Chloe had used. It was a sincere, heartfelt acknowledgement from the bottom of her heart. I bowed my head as if she were standing right in front of me. Thank you. I simply replied and hung up the phone. When I returned to the living room, Emily was looking at me with concern. I gave her a small smile and took a sip of my warm coffee. Beneath the bitterness, I tasted absolute relief. David still did not realize the true horror his lies had invited. He did not know how Chloe reported back to him after failing to pick up the medication. Perhaps they just laughed it off. They told me I couldn't get it without the logbook. How weird. Tomorrow was finally the day of his monthly checkup. His attending physician, Dr. Harrison, was a strict man who only looked at data and facts. David's vanity and Chloe's ignorance would hold no weight in that exam room. Until now, I had carefully chosen my words to protect David's pride, casually conveying his true symptoms to Dr. Harrison without bruising his ego. The atmosphere in that exam room had only remained peaceful thanks to the blue folder I meticulously maintained. Tomorrow, sitting in that chair without me, David would face the reality that he could not answer a single medical question on his own. The moment the illusion of the strong, independent man he built came crashing down was just around the corner. The afternoon in my daughter's apartment was incredibly quiet. I sat at the small living room table, sorting through the few documents I had brought with me. Among them was an old photocopy. It was last year's application receipt for the copay assistance program and the insurance prior authorization. The moment I saw it, my fingertips stopped moving. David's illness required astronomical specialized treatments to slow its progression. If we did not utilize these assistance programs and the massive insurance waivers, the monthly medical bills would have crushed our household finances in an instant. That is exactly why, around this time every year, I adjusted my work schedule and exhausted myself running between government offices, insurance brokers, and the hospital billing department, tax returns, proof of household residency, clinical evaluation forms signed by his primary doctor, proof of health insurance coverage, gathering every single piece of paper without missing a single detail and submitting them to the Department of Human Services before the deadline. It was never an easy task. David did not even know this process existed. My former company's health insurance is top tier, so everything is covered for pennies. He genuinely believed that. He could not even imagine me dragging my exhausted body straight off a night shift, waiting in endless lines at the county clerk's office, walking miles under the blazing sun to fetch missing paperwork. To him, his low medical bills were simply proof that he was a socially protected elite man. He never considered it was the result of his wife's desperate, sweat-soaked labor. While reminiscing about the past and preparing to throw the photocopy in the trash, my smartphone buzzed quietly again. The screen displayed the main number of Chicago Memorial Hospital. The caller was the medical social worker, Miss Davis. "Sarah, I am so sorry to bother you when you are busy. It is Davis from Social Services." Her voice lacked its usual calm tone. It was clearly laced with confusion and tension. She was the hero who had helped me navigate his home care systems and financial assistance applications all these years. She knew how exhausted I was trying to balance his care with my job, and was the kind soul who constantly told me, "Please, you need to rest. I just received a notification from the main reception. They said you removed yourself as his registered family member." Miss Davis chose her words very carefully. "Could you tell me what is going on?" "The deadline for his patient assistance program renewal is next week. I completely assumed you would come by to pick up the paperwork this year as usual." I took a deep breath and looked at the blue sky outside the window. "Miss Davis, thank you so much for everything you have always done for us. Actually, my divorce from David was finalized yesterday." I heard Miss Davis gasp over the line. "Therefore, I cannot submit the renewal documents this year. Please direct all future administrative procedures to the patient himself or his new partner." Miss Davis was speechless for a moment. As a medical social worker, she understood exactly what this situation meant better than anyone. "Sarah, does David understand what he has to do on his own?" Miss Davis's voice trembled slightly. "The renewal deadline is just days away. If he misses it, his medical expenses starting next month will default to his full deductible and out-of-pocket maximum. Above all, I cannot imagine David gathering all those complex documents on his own." I shook my head silently. I knew Miss Davis could not see me, but I could not help it. "He told me taking care of him was my basic duty. He also told me he did not need me anymore because his new partner would support him from now on." My voice sounded surprisingly cold and clear even to my own ears, so I simply did exactly what he asked. A heavy silence fell over the phone. She knew exactly how much of his ruthless abuse I had endured and how desperately I had exhausted myself to protect his life. "Anyway, I understand," Miss Davis finally said. Her voice was quiet but filled with strong resolution. "If you have made your decision, Sarah, I have absolutely no right to stop you. You have sacrificed pieces of your own soul to support that man all these years. Please let me say from the bottom of my heart, you have done more than enough." With those words, the cold knot that had formed deep in my chest melted a little more. "Thank you. You really saved me so many times, Miss Davis. I will be present at his regular checkup tomorrow. Dr. Harrison and I will work together to ensure the patient fully understands the severe reality of his situation." "You do not need to worry about this anymore, Sarah," spurred by Miss Davis's reassuring words. I hung up the phone, took the copy of the renewal application in my hand, and slowly tore it in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed like a blade cutting through my lingering attachments to the past. My days of bowing my head and begging for someone else's life were finally over. Around the same time, my ex-husband David was sitting in the living room of his luxury downtown condo, arms crossed and in a foul mood. On the table was a bottle of over-the-counter multivitamin gummies that Chloe had bought to replace the prescription medications she failed to pick up. That pharmacy was so rude. They said they couldn't give me anything without the logbook and told me to check with his wife. Chloe complained, venting to David. "I told them I was going to be your new wife, but they completely ignored me." David scoffed and pulled Chloe by the shoulder. "Forget it. The pharmacists there have always been rigid. They are a bunch of gloomy women who probably got along too well with Sarah. Anyway." He was completely oblivious to the biochemical changes already starting to wreak havoc inside his body just from skipping one day of medication. "I have my appointment with Dr. Harrison tomorrow. I will just tell him to transfer my prescriptions to another pharmacy. I am the patient. The hospital has an obligation to listen to what I want." David felt completely victorious. He had kicked out his nagging wife, secured a compliant young mistress, and believed his life was about to become brighter than ever. He fully expected tomorrow's clinic visit to be like all the others. A quick 5-minute chat and some small talk before leaving. But he did not know yet. He did not know that the gloomy woman he dismissed had acted as a massive fortress, shielding him from the brutal, unforgiving reality of the American healthcare system. He did not know that by losing his medical proxy, he had stripped himself of his greatest armor, leaving him completely exposed to a cold and merciless reality. The moment he opened the door to that exam room tomorrow afternoon, the castle of lies he had built would begin its spectacular collapse. After dinner, Emily pulled a small cardboard box from the back of her closet. "Mom, these are the things I packed in a box when you helped me move out." The box hit the floor with a dull thud. It had old packing tape on it. It was full of my personal belongings that I had brought from my parents' house years ago, but had shoved into the back of a closet and forgotten. Opening the box, I found old gardening books and scraps of patchwork fabric. Before I got married, I loved growing small herbs and flowers on the balcony. Spending my Sunday mornings watering them while smelling the damp soil was my ultimate stress relief. But after David's illness was diagnosed, that time disappeared entirely. Dirt is filthy. If bugs get in here, it will affect my health. One day, David casually tossed my precious pot straight into a trash bag. I could not say a word. I just silently swept up the scattered dirt with a broom. Since that day, I stopped growing flowers. Picking up the book, I smelled the scent of old paper. As I traced the cover with my fingertips, the smartphone I had placed on the table buzzed once. Looking at the screen, I saw a text message from my sister-in-law, Susan. Susan was my age. She had always idolized her older brother as the pride of the family and constantly meddled in our domestic affairs. The screen displayed a short sentence: "My brother is a wretch, but abandoning your sick husband, even though you are a nurse, makes you the worst scum in the world." The moment I saw those words, a sharp thorn pierced deep into my chest. More than being yelled at, more than being cursed at, that short sentence tore at my heart. Abandoning him even though you are a nurse. Susan knew absolutely nothing about how many sleepless nights I had endured, or how many thousands of pages of medical records I had written. 5 years ago, when David suffered a massive attack in the middle of the night and was rushed to the ER, I called Susan in absolute desperation. I begged her to sit with him at the hospital for just one night because I had an unmissable shift at my own hospital. But Susan had snapped. "I am busy too. You are the medical professional. Figure it out yourself." And she hung up on me. In the end, I had to bow my head, beg a coworker to cover my shift, and spend the night awake in a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. I placed my thumb over the text input box. "You understand nothing? Try taking care of him for just one day before you talk to me." Countless retorts flooded my mind. My fingertips trembled slightly, but I deleted all the text. I silently placed my smartphone face down on the table. Mom Emily, noticing my shift in mood, looked at my face with concern. "Was it Aunt Susan?" I nodded slowly. Emily bit her lip and gently covered my face-down phone with her own hand. "You do not need to look at it. You do not have to ever listen to the words of those people again." The warmth of her hand transferred to my cold fingers. I realized that trying to make excuses and begging them to understand me was what made it so painful. They never intended to understand me from the start. They just wanted to chain me with convenient labels like wife and nurse, so they could protect their own comfortable lives. I let out a deep sigh and smiled at Emily. "You are right. They have nothing to do with me anymore." I placed a gardening book next to the face-own phone. "Hey, Emily, do you want to go to the flower shop by the station tomorrow? I might want to buy a small potted plant for this room." Emily's face lit up immediately. "Yes, let's go. I have always wanted to try growing a cactus or something." Our laughter echoed in the small apartment. It was the clearest, purest sound I had heard in 22 years. Freed from the crushing pressure of carrying someone else's life, I was finally able to take a small breath just for myself. No one could ever steal my flowers from me again. Susan's cold words could no longer serve as chains to bind me. I was completely and absolutely free from that house. Meanwhile, the next morning, David woke up in a terrible mood in his new condo. The clock was already past 8 in the morning. Normally, at this hour, a mathematically calculated low-sodium breakfast would be waiting on the table, along with a precisely separated dose of his morning pills. But the table in front of him was completely empty. "Chloe, isn't breakfast ready?" David yelled toward the bedroom. A muffled voice replied from under the blankets. It is my day off from the medical spa. Let me sleep." Chloe turned her back to the door, sinking deeper under the sheets. David clicked his tongue and headed to the kitchen. He tried to pour himself a cup of coffee, but the hand holding the pot trembled slightly. Since last night, he had felt an unpleasant sticky sweat coating his palms. "Just skipping one day of medication cannot ruin my health this fast." He forced himself to believe that Sarah was always exaggerating everything, chewing on a piece of cold toast. David began getting ready for his clinic appointment in the afternoon. He pulled his favorite designer jacket from the closet and adjusted his appearance in the mirror. He was supported by the arrogant belief that he was still a vibrant man who commanded respect in society. But when he went to put his things in his briefcase, he froze. He could not find his hospital ID card. Normally, his health insurance card, his patient assistance program card, and his hospital ID were carefully organized inside a blue zippered pouch, resting on the entryway shelf. That pouch was managed entirely by Sarah. David aggressively opened and closed drawers until he finally pulled an old expired hospital ID from his wallet. He had no idea where his insurance or subsidy papers were. "Whatever, I am a lifelong patient there. They will know who I am when they see my face." He shoved his wallet into his pocket and called out to Chloe in the bedroom. "Hey Chloe, get up, we are going to the hospital this afternoon." Chloe sat up, groaning with dissatisfaction. The hospital is so boring. Let's go to that new cafe by the station when we are done." David nodded in satisfaction. "Yeah, sounds good. My appointments always end in 5 minutes anyway." At this moment, David remained completely clueless. He had no idea how much backstage preparation and coordination Sarah did with the doctors to ensure his appointments ended peacefully in 5 minutes. And he had no idea that the old hospital ID in his pocket would do absolutely nothing to protect him from the brutal reality beginning today. The daily life he had painted with vanity was just hours away from a catastrophic collapse. "David, that jacket looks amazing on you." Chloe clapped her hands by the entryway mirror. David adjusted his collar smugly, looking at his reflection. With his healthy complexion and tailored clothes, he looked nothing like a man harboring a deadly disease. He looked every bit the reliable, prosperous executive. "Well, you picked it out for me. It is almost a waste to just wear it to the hospital." The two laughed together as they walked out of the condo building. Outside, a flawless blue sky stretched above them. To David, it felt like the perfect start to a new life, finally discarding the depressing baggage named Sarah. However, as they began walking toward the L train station, David felt a slight anomaly in his right leg. It felt heavier than usual, as if the strength required to push off the pavement was slightly draining away. It was the silent warning sign that Schem's medication yesterday was already beginning to erode his nervous system. "It is just my imagination. I probably just drank a little too much wine last night." David quickened his pace and pulled Chloe's slender shoulder closer. He firmly believed his sheer willpower could overcome the shadow of any illness. At exactly the same time, I was sitting in the county clerk's office. In front of me were the forms for my change of address and separation of household. "Your paperwork is completely processed." Clerk politely handed me my new official residency documents. Only Emily's name and mine were printed on them. The name David Miller no longer existed in my household. The moment I accepted that single piece of paper, the last heavy knot deep in my shoulders dissolved. The realization that our legal ties were permanently broken bloomed in my chest like a quiet, profound joy. Leaving the clerk's office, I headed straight to the bank. I needed to redirect my hospital payroll deposits and transfer all my personal savings out of the joint account we had opened when we got married. Moving everything into an account solely in my name. The transfer is complete. Would you like us to destroy the old debit cards and checkbooks? The banker asked. I nodded silently, watching the old cards from the joint account get sucked into the industrial shredder. I let out a massive sigh of relief. David had left the management of all our living expenses entirely to me. He probably had no idea how much money was automatically debited from his account every month, nor how much the utilities and premium insurance premiums cost. He probably did not even know his own approximate account balance. Starting today, he would have to face his own bank statements. He would have to manage it all himself, including the astronomical payments for his specialized medical treatments. I slipped my new debit card into my purse and walked out of the bank. The sky was high, and my steps felt even lighter than yesterday. At 1:30 in the afternoon, David and Chloe arrived at the massive lobby of Chicago Memorial Hospital. As usual, he walked up to the self-check-in kiosk and inserted his old hospital ID. However, the screen flashed a bright red error message. Insurance verification required at the main desk. David clicked his tongue at the soulless machine. How annoying. This screen never pops up. He left Chloe sitting in the waiting area and got into the long line for the main billing and reception desk. 15 minutes later, it was finally his turn. Mr. Miller, correct? Today, we need to verify your primary insurance and request the original card for your copay assistance program, the billing clerk stated in a robotic, mechanical voice. Irritated, David pulled his insurance card from his wallet and tossed it into the tray. This should be enough. I do not have that assistance card you are talking about today, he spoke dismissively. I have been a patient here for years. Just look at the records. You will figure it out. The clerk's expression did not change. I am sorry, sir, but if we cannot verify the original copay assistance card, your out-of-pocket responsibility for today's visit, and the pharmacy bill will default to your standard deductible or self-pay rates. David could not believe his ears. Self-pay? Do you have any idea how much my medications cost? It is a strict policy requirement. We cannot make exceptions. The clerk's cold voice drew the stares of surrounding patients. David's face turned red and he hurriedly lowered his voice. Okay, fine. I will bring it next time. Just process it normally for today. The clerk typed quietly on his keyboard and dealt another factual blow. Mr. Miller, your copay assistance authorization expires next week. Have you completed the renewal process? Renewal process. The words got stuck in David's throat. He had no idea where those documents were or how to even initiate the process. I will look into it later. David practically fled the reception desk and hurried back to Chloe. Chloe looked up from her smartphone, her lips pursed in displeasure. You took forever. Why does registration take so long? Just a minor technical issue, David lied, dropping heavily into the chair next to her. But as he stared at the printed routing slip in his hands, his fingertips were abnormally cold. Until today, he had almost never experienced wait times at the hospital. That was because Sarah always researched peak hours in advance and booked the smoothest slots while he sat on the comfortable lobby sofas. Sarah was the one handling the tedious arguments at the reception desk, insurance verifications, and paperwork submissions. He believed his appointments only lasted 5 minutes solely because Sarah had been moving behind the scenes for over an hour, before he even walked through the doors. Now that invisible breakwater was gone, he was taking the freezing waves of reality straight to the face. An hour passed. Sitting on the hard bench outside the exam rooms, Chloe's mood had visibly soured. Why haven't they called you yet? It is my day off. Her complaints grated on David's nerves. Just be patient. Big hospitals are always like this. He snapped back in a low voice, but his tone lacked its usual dominance. Perhaps because he had skipped his medication, his breathing was becoming noticeably shallow. The sticky sweat on his palms was getting worse. Internal medicine David Miller, please proceed to exam room 3. Finally, his name echoed from the speaker. David tried to stand up, but for a terrifying second, his knees almost buckled. He gripped the handrail tightly to support his weight, desperate to hide his weakness from Chloe. Let's go, Chloe. He forced a fake smile and pushed open the heavy door to the exam room. But the atmosphere waiting for him inside was completely different from the calm environment he was used to. Sitting behind the desk, Dr. Harrison's eyes pierced through him with unprecedented icy sharpness, and sitting in the center of the desk, like a terrifying warning summons, was the familiar worn-out blue medication log that Sarah had left behind. When David pushed open the heavy door to the exam room, the noisy chatter of the waiting room was completely shut out. A faint clinical antiseptic smell floated in the sterile white room. The cold air from the AC brushed against David's flushed cheeks. Usually, Sarah walked in first, shook hands and said, "Thank you for seeing us today." David would follow with a confident, leisurely stride. That was the familiar routine in this room. While Sarah handled the detailed symptom reporting and paperwork submission, David only had to sit quietly with his arms crossed. But today, the person sitting next to David was Chloe in her bright summer dress. Sitting behind the desk, Dr. Harrison did not look up immediately when they entered. He kept his sharp gaze fixed on the screen of his electronic medical record. Right next to his keyboard sat the familiar blue medication log. "Good afternoon, doctor." David forced a booming, bright voice and dropped heavily into the plastic guest chair. Chloe sat next to him, giving a casual little wave as if she were greeting a barista. "Nice to meet you. I will be accompanying him from now on." David touched Chloe's shoulder with a satisfied smile. "Actually, my wife and I finalized our divorce yesterday. She will be my support system going forward." He wanted to show off the fact that he was a winner who had claimed an exciting new life. He wanted to flaunt the luxury of a man who had discarded his tedious middle-aged wife for a beautiful young partner. "She is young, but she is very capable. You do not need to worry about a thing." However, Dr. Harrison's expression did not change one bit. He slowly raised his head, directing an icy stare straight at David. "I see. Then, let us get straight to the point." There were no words of congratulations, no reaction of surprise, just a highly administrative, distant, and freezing voice echoing in the room. David felt slightly deflated, but quickly regained his composure. "Yes, please just prescribe my usual medications. I am feeling a little heavy today, but it is probably just fatigue." He deliberately downplayed his physical condition. He did not want to look like a severely ill patient in front of Chloe. He kept telling himself that the unpleasant sweat on his palm since last night was just from a lack of sleep. Without looking away from the chart, Dr. Harrison asked dryly, "What time did you take your morning medications?" David choked on his words for a second. "Well, I actually did not take them this morning. Why not?" "There was a mix-up at the pharmacy and we could not pick up the new batch." David let out a light, dismissive laugh. "Well, skipping one day is not a big deal, right?" The sound of Dr. Harrison's typing stopped instantly. He let out a deep sigh and turned his freezing eyes entirely on David. "Mr. Miller, the medications you are taking are critically essential suppressants to halt the progression of your disease." The doctor's voice was laden with a quiet, undeniable fury. "I prescribed them down to the milligram, scheduling them meticulously to maintain a constant concentration in your bloodstream." The air in the exam room tightened instantly under Dr. Harrison's severe tone. "Interrupting that regimen based on your own amateur judgment is absolutely inexcusable. Have you forgotten that doing so carries the risk of triggering a fatal, life-threatening cardiovascular attack?" Chloe looked back and forth between Dr. Harrison and David, her eyes wide with shock. "Doctor, you are exaggerating. I have lived with this disease for years and I have never collapsed from it." David lied, but his own words were a betrayal of his past. 5 years ago, when he suffered a massive attack in the middle of the night and was taken away by ambulance. Who was the one who got him into the car and desperately kept him alive until they reached this very hospital? Dr. Harrison silently picked up the old medication log, flipped through the pages and asked quietly, "Let me ask you this. After taking the new post-dinner medication, what happened to the tremors in your right hand?" David frowned. "Tremors in my right hand? I have never had tremors." He firmly believed he had perfect control and awareness of his own body, but Dr. Harrison pointed to a specific page in the log. It is recorded right here in your ex-wife's handwriting." The doctor read the small print out loud. 30 minutes after dinner, slight tremors are observed in the fingertips of the right hand. They subside after 30 seconds, but it has occurred for 3 consecutive days. David was speechless. He himself had not noticed those tiny changes at all. Sarah had been continuously watching his every move, whether he was watching TV or eating dinner, and the nighttime palpitations. 3 nights ago, you woke up a bit short of breath, did you not? Dr. Harrison's interrogation did not stop. That is just because the room was stuffy. 2:15 a.m. Shallow breathing, cold sweat on the forehead, subsided after 5 minutes of back rubbing. This is also in the records. A drop of cold sweat slid down David's back. The symptoms he had dismissed as mere fatigue or a bad night's sleep. Sarah had caught them all and reported them as warning signs to the doctor. The only reason he thought he was healthy was because she was constantly running ahead of him, crushing the seeds of a fatal crisis before they could bloom. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in the chair beside him. "David, you never told me you had symptoms like that." Her voice completely lacked the light, carefree tone from before. "You told me it was basically like taking vitamins." David could not look Chloe in the eyes. "No, Sarah is just exaggerating things in her notes." He piled on excuses desperately. He wanted to maintain his vanity to protect the illusion that he was a strong, untouchable man. But Dr. Harrison was ruthlessly clinical. He pulled a blank sheet of paper from his drawer and placed it on the desk. "By the way, regarding the renewal of your COA assistance program, the deadline is next week, but we have not yet received a request for the clinical evaluation forms." David's eyes widened. "Renewal? What is that? If you do not utilize this program, the specialized medications for your disease will amount to thousands of dollars every month," Dr. Harrison stated dryly. "Your ex-wife always had all the documents perfectly prepared and submitted to the financial office by this time every year." A terrifying silence enveloped the exam room. The only sound David could hear was the rapid, terrified beating of his own heart, the heaviness in his legs, the sticky sweat on his palms, the expiring insurance paperwork, the unmanaged medications. None of that was from alcohol or fatigue. It was the undeniable beginning of the collapse of his daily life, the moment his lifeline was cut. Dr. Harrison looked away from the medical chart and for the first time looked directly into David's eyes. "I received a message from the main reception earlier." Dr. Harrison's voice dropped an octave. "Your ex-wife has officially requested to be removed from your emergency contact and medical proxy registry." David gasped. "Well, we are divorced, so that is obvious." From now on, Chloe will be. Before David could finish his sentence, Dr. Harrison cut him off coldly. "No, you do not understand anything at all." Dr. Harrison quietly closed the file on his desk. The small thud echoed ominously in the room. "As of this moment, your ex-wife will have absolutely no involvement in your treatment." "Let me explain exactly what that means." David froze in his chair. The freedom he thought he had won by stamping that divorce decree was in reality the act of cutting his own lifeline with his own hands. "As of this moment, your ex-wife will have absolutely no involvement in your treatment." Dr. Harrison's calm declaration weighed heavily in the cold air of the exam room. David maintained a weak, forced smile on his face, desperately attempting to downplay the gravity of what was happening. "I do not fully understand. That is why Chloe is here with me today. She will manage my medications from now on. There should not be any problem." David looked to Chloe for her agreement, but Chloe had been staring at the floor, refusing to meet David's eyes. In her head, the vivid, terrifying records the doctor had just read aloud: nighttime palpitations. Tremors sounded like a blaring emergency siren. Dr. Harrison looked at David's weak smile with 0 degrees of sympathy. "Mr. Miller, the illness you are fighting is not a simple condition where you just pop a pill and go about your normal life." The doctor tapped the thick blue folder sitting on his desk. It was the copied volume of the medical journals that Sarah had compiled over the years. "Your ex-wife brought this notebook without fail every single month." The doctor's voice contained a deep respect for a fellow medical caregiver mixed with silent contempt for the man sitting in front of him. Before I even had to ask, she had organized the last 30 days of your subtle post-medication reactions, your daily dietary sodium intake, your sleep hours, and any pre-attack symptoms, and presented them to me perfectly. David felt his throat completely dry up. That is just, she was being dramatic. I have been working a normal job and living a normal life. That is because I have my own physical stamina. You are completely mistaken. Dr. Harrison sharply cut through David's delusion. The only reason you were able to live a normal life is because your ex-wife strictly controlled every aspect of your daily existence to match the progression of your disease. A terrifying silence fell over the room. Dr. Harrison continued with relentless facts. The fact that your ex-wife revoked her medical power of attorney means there is no longer anyone legally authorized to sign the consent forms for your specialized treatments. God forbid if you suffer a massive attack in the middle of the night and are rushed to the ER in an unconscious state. There is no available family member to make immediate life-saving decisions regarding your care. David panicked and grabbed Chloe's shoulder. But Chloe is here. All she has to do is sign. But Dr. Harrison slowly shook his head. Does your new partner possess the determination and medical knowledge required to do so? The doctor's sharp gaze shifted to Chloe. Miss Chloe, if Mr. Miller goes into respiratory distress in the middle of the night, can you make the precise decision on exactly when to call 911? Chloe shuddered violently. Can you accurately list his 5 current specialized medications, their exact milligram dosages, and his entire history of adverse side effects to the paramedics? Chloe was completely speechless. The life she had dreamed of was a glamorous lifestyle with a wealthy, prosperous older man. She had never signed up for the raw, terrifying responsibility of trembling in the middle of the night, listening to someone's irregular breathing, and deciding whether to call an ambulance. I do not know anything about that, Chloe managed to say with a trembling voice. David told me it was like taking vitamins. David's face turned bright red and he glared at Chloe furiously. Shut your mouth, you can learn it as you go. He was desperately trying to maintain his facade. He refused to admit that he was a severely ill patient, fundamentally weak, and incapable of surviving without someone else's exhaustive management. Dr. Harrison let out a deep sigh. He quietly closed the electronic medical record on his monitor. The small click of the mouse was the absolute signal marking the beginning of the end for David. Mr. Miller, we are done here, Dr. Harrison said in a completely bureaucratic tone. I will issue today's prescriptions. However, if your copay assistance renewal is not processed in time, you will be billed the full retail cost starting next month. You will have to decide for yourself whether you can afford to keep paying for these specialized medications. David opened his mouth to argue, but no voice came out. The doctor's cold eyes no longer looked at him as a patient to be protected, but as a foolish man who chose to turn his back on reality. That same afternoon, I was walking back to the apartment with Emily, carrying the small potted plant we had just bought at the flower shop near the station. Just having a touch of green in our new living room made the air feel a little warmer. As I began preparing dinner, my smartphone rang. The screen displayed a call from David's mother, Barbara. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, took a quiet, deep breath, and answered, "Hello, Sarah. What on earth do you think you are doing?" Barbara's shrill, piercing voice exploded through the speaker. David told me everything. You packed up and left the house without permission and forced him to sign divorce papers. Barbara's voice dripped with blatant rage and a condescending tone that completely belittled me. My boy is suffering from a terrible illness, and you abandoned him. Even though you are a nurse, you have no human decency. 22 years ago, Barbara had clung to me in her hospital bed, crying and begging me not to abandon him. But at some point, she began treating my devotion as her absolute divine right. She became convinced that the only reason her son could lead a normal life, despite his intractable illness, was simply that her son was an exceptional, superior man. Sarah, You are not exactly young anymore, you know, Barbara continued, sounding triumphant. David has a prestigious title. His salary is fantastic. Do you really think an average middle-aged woman like you can survive on your own after walking out of that house? I listened to Barbara's tirade in silence. In the past, those words would have hurt me. I might have cried and argued saying, I am doing my best. But right now, Barbara's threat sounded ridiculously comical. Barbara, I started. My voice was surprisingly calm and serene. It is certainly true that David's title and salary are fantastic. Barbara scoffed. Exactly. So, apologize right now and come home. If you do, I will speak well of you too. I cut her off and stated the facts clearly. Do you have any idea how much he is going to have to pay in pocket medical expenses starting next month? I could feel Barbara choke on her words over the line. Medical expenses? His insurance covers all of that. I traced my finger over the fresh stack of residency and financial documents I had just obtained from the county clerk. If he does not utilize the financial assistance programs and insurance waivers that I personally managed, the billing for his specialized infusions and diagnostic scans will exceed $10,000 every month. I laid out the facts clinically. Until now, I sacrificed my own days off to run between government offices, insurance brokers, and the hospital to handle the paperwork. But now, I am a stranger to him. The renewal deadline is next week, and I guarantee you he does not even know where the forms are located. What? What are you saying? Do you think those threats will work on me? Barbara's voice began to tremble weakly. It is not a threat, it is reality. I took a sip of cold tea and let out a quiet sigh. I have resigned from my duty to support him. Please, you and his wonderful new wife can support your prestigious son from now on. Goodbye. I unilaterally hung up the phone and turned off the device. I would never allow a call from that family to connect to me again. From the corner of the room, Emily was watching me silently. Mom, are you okay? I smiled softly and nodded my head. Yes, I am not afraid of anything anymore. A solid, unwavering resolution had hardened in my heart. I had not just been passively enduring his abuse. I had been systematically finalizing every legal and administrative procedure for this exact day, preparing to hit them with the ruthless reality of how much they depended on me as undeniable proof. The true meaning behind my silent departure was to dictate the final punishment, a daily life without me. Meanwhile, David was frozen in the hospital corridor after leaving the exam room. Beside him, Chloe was glued to her smartphone, clearly trying to put physical distance between them. An unpleasant sticky sweat clung to David's palms. He still had not fully realized it. What he truly lost today was not just a medical proxy registry. It was the absolute irreplaceable peace of mind that had fundamentally supported his life and existence. Something he could never ever get back. The ride back from the hospital to the new condo was in absolute silence. David's footsteps through the streets at dusk were incredibly heavy, and a massive invisible gap had opened up between him and Chloe. Entering the living room of the condo, David practically collapsed onto the sofa. CL. It was just a 1-month supply of his medications, paid through his primary insurance, but without the copay assistance waiver. David stared at the number in absolute disbelief. Thanks to Sarah handling the paperwork in the past, his out-of-pocket responsibility at the pharmacy counter had never been more than $40. Now it was this. Furthermore, if he factored in the specialized blood tests and imaging scans he skipped today, his monthly expenses could easily exceed $10,000. Hey David, what are you going to do about this? Chloe demanded, her voice laden with disgust. In her hand was a massive plastic bag she had brought from the pharmacy. Inside were mountains of prescription bottles and blister packs. What do you mean? What am I going to do? I have to pay for it. I need these medications to live, David retorted, unable to hide his extreme irritation. But if you have to pay this much every month, we won't be able to go on vacation. We won't even be able to go out for nice dinners. Chloe's words showed zero concern for his health. She was completely terrified that her own lifestyle would deteriorate. David clicked his tongue and snatched the heavy pharmacy bag out of Chloe's hand. He violently dumped the contents onto the coffee table. Post-breakfast, afternoon, post-dinner, right before bed, and rescue medications as needed. The color-coded bottles and packets piled up like a mountain. Staring at the mountain of drugs, David gasped. Normally, Sarah had every single pill perfectly sorted into small individual compartments in a plastic organizer she bought at the store. When he woke up, the exact pills he needed to take were already sitting next to a glass of water on the table. But right now, all he had in front of him was a pile of soulless plastic bottles. David picked up a bottle from the top and looked at the label. It only listed the complex pharmaceutical name and generic instructions. 3 massive questions surfaced in David's mind. Question 1. Which of these pills am I supposed to take when the tremors in my right hand start? Dr. Harrison had pointed out his hand tremors earlier, but among this massive pile, David had no clue which drug was meant to suppress those specific side effects. Sarah used to adjust the timing of his doses based on his symptoms. Your hands are a little shaky today, so take this one first, she would say, making the clinical decision for him. Question 2. Where do I even request the copay assistance renewal forms that are due next week and that I need to prepare? Dr. Harrison's warning echoed in his skull. If he missed the renewal, his medical bills would permanently default to the astronomical out-of-pocket maximums. But David did not even know which government website to visit, let alone what financial documents were required in addition to the doctor's clinical evaluation. He did not even know where to start the process. And question 3. If I start choking and have a massive attack tonight, who do I call? In the past, Sarah would wake up instantly, rub his back, and make precise medical decisions. Should I call 911 or should I administer a rescue inhaler and monitor him? David did not even possess the basic criteria to make that judgment himself. With trembling hands, David gripped a pill bottle and looked at Chloe. Hey Chloe, you listened to the pharmacist's explanation today, right? How am I supposed to take all this? Chloe grimaced and took a step back. I do not know. It was too complicated. I wasn't even listening. You weren't listening. You said you were going to support me. David instinctively raised his voice. His anxiety and sheer terror mutated into rage directed at Chloe. That is just something people say, Chloe yelled back, refusing to back down. I am not a registered nurse. I am not a caregiver. I work at a medical spa. There is no way I can handle a mountain of drugs like this. Chloe's eyes were ice cold as she looked at him. The man she loved was a prosperous executive who wore sharp suits and took her to luxury restaurants, not an elderly, chronically ill patient scattering pill bottles over a table, terrified of an invisible threat. You were the one who said you would be totally fine without your ex-wife. Handle your illness yourself. With that, Chloe turned her back, walked into the bedroom, and slammed the door. David was left completely alone in the living room with the mountain of medications, 3 questions that no one could answer. It was a brutal, merciless reminder of just how massive Sarah's existence truly was. At exactly the same time, I was watering the small potted plant in Emily's apartment. I had placed the cute rounded plant right next to a small cactus. I listened quietly to the sound of water soaking into the soil. Mom, what kind of plant is that? Emily asked, looking over her shoulder from the kitchen where she was prepping dinner. It is called a peperomia. They say it is very hardy and thrives even if the air is a bit dry, I replied, gently wiping a drop of water off one of the leaves with my finger. This was not a tightrope walk to keep someone's life tethered to the earth. It was simply a peaceful moment, silently watching a small life grow. Everything I had wished for during 22 years was right here in this small apartment. Dinner is ready, Emily called out. I stood up. On the table was a hot vegetable soup and grilled salmon with herb lemon butter. It was not a bland, sodium-free hospital meal forced upon a patient. It was a normal comforting dinner that smelled of butter and herbs. We sat across from each other and put our hands together. Let's eat. The moment I took my first bite, it was so delicious it made me cry. Being able to eat a meal cooked just for me, at my own pace, something so incredibly normal, felt like an absolute miracle. After dinner, I unlocked my smartphone and opened the clock app. On the screen were over 10 meticulously scheduled alarms: morning, noon, evening, and the middle of the night. Each one was set to manage David's medication schedules and to check for his potential crisis. I silently swiped left on each one, deleting them. Delete, delete, delete. With every alarm that vanished from the screen, I felt as if one of the invisible chains binding me was snapping. When I finished deleting the last one, the screen simply read, "No alarm set." I placed my phone on the table and watched a comedy show with Emily. Our laughter echoed in the room. No one was ever going to yell at me unreasonably again. My life belonged entirely to me now. Meanwhile, that same night, David was huddled alone in the dimly lit living room. Chloe had locked herself in the bedroom and showed no signs of coming out. David had not eaten dinner, but he was in a panic because he knew he needed to take his evening medications. Staring at the handwritten notes in Sarah's logbook, he could not figure out how to connect her instructions to his current symptoms. The patient shows no anxiety, but nighttime palpitations are increasing. The moment he read that sentence, David's heart gave a violent lurch. He suddenly felt it was harder to breathe. His throat went dry and an unpleasant sweat broke out on his palms. This is the precursor to a massive attack, or was it just a panic attack brought on by fear? David could not tell the difference. Sarah, he unconsciously muttered his ex-wife's name. If she were here now, she would rub his back, select the exact rescue pill, and reassure him, "It is okay, it is just fatigue." But when he looked around, all he saw were cold walls. With trembling hands, David picked up a pill at random and swallowed it with water. He had no idea if it was the right choice. He curled up on the sofa, forced to do nothing but wait for the sun to rise, gnawing on the sheer terror of realizing how heavy the lifeline he had thrown away truly was. But his despair had only just begun. The reality waiting for him the next day was far more merciless. He was about to experience the true catastrophic nightmare of having his medical proxy revoked within the unforgiving machinery of the healthcare system. Even if it is the patient calling, we cannot authorize an ER admission under the current status of your file. Hearing the robotic voice through the phone, David could not believe his ears. It was 3:00 a.m. David had woken up with a crushing, agonizing pain in the center of his chest. Desperate, he had dialed the overnight emergency triage line for Chicago Memorial Hospital. Cold sweat poured down his forehead, and every time he breathed, a nauseating wheeze rattled in his throat. Why not? "I have been a lifelong patient there," David tried to yell with a trembling voice, but only a hoarse croak came out. "Mr. Miller, yesterday your registered medical proxy officially filed the paperwork to revoke her status and HIPAA authorizations," the overnight triage nurse stated with extreme bureaucratic detachment. "Given the severity of your condition, if you are transported here, you might require high-risk, specialized medications and immediate emergency procedures. If you fall into an unconscious state, we do not have a legal proxy to authorize consent." The nurse's words echoed coldly in David's skull. Until today, his wife was his emergency contact and the legally authorized proxy to approve his treatments. Currently, Mr. Miller, you do not have any registered family member to act as your guarantor. That is what revoking a medical proxy entails. In the treatment of complex and life-threatening illnesses, hospitals are hyper-vigilant against massive liability risks. If there is no one who can legally consent to high-risk split-second decisions, they cannot blindly initiate critical procedures. I see in the notes that you have a new partner. Does she currently reside with you? Spurred by the nurse, David crawled across the floor and threw open the bedroom door. "Hey, Chloe, wake up." But she was not there. The bed was unmade, and not a single one of her belongings remained in the room. The closet was half empty, leaving only the faint, sweet scent of her perfume lingering in the air. On the nightstand was a small piece of paper. "I cannot deal with this. Goodbye." David crumpled the piece of paper in his fist. Confronted with the gruesome reality of an incurable disease and the sight of an older man suffering in the middle of the night, she had fled without a second thought. All she ever loved was the illusion of a healthy, prosperous executive. "There is no one here," David replied in absolute despair. The triage nurse lowered her tone slightly. First, please dial 911. You will have to follow the paramedic's instructions for your transport destination. However, I cannot guarantee our facility will accept the transfer. The line went dead. David collapsed onto the cold floor of his dark living room, forced to just lie there and wait for his breathing to stabilize. How powerless he was, how incapable of surviving without someone holding him up. The reality of his existence pierced through his entire body along with the freezing cold of the floorboards. Early the next afternoon, after his attack had somewhat subsided, David clung to one last thread of hope and called Miss Davis, the social worker. He was desperate for help regarding his insurance renewals due next week, but Miss Davis's words pushed him further into the abyss. Mr. Miller, you must obtain your tax returns, proof of residency, and the clinical evaluation forms from Dr. Harrison. Miss Davis's voice conveyed none of the warm, supportive empathy she used to offer. You must physically take those documents to the Department of Human Services and your insurance broker yourself. The deadline is next Wednesday. David put his head in his hands. You cannot just tell me that. I am in no condition to walk outside right now. Can't someone else go do it for me? If the patient cannot physically mobilize, a legally designated proxy or family member must do it, Miss Davis replied dryly. In the past, your ex-wife sacrificed her own days off, from work to run between all these offices. We were only able to process everything smoothly thanks to her incredible devoted labor. David was speechless. Sarah did all of this every year without uttering a single complaint, while he hurled insults at her, claiming it was her duty. She spent an unimaginable amount of energy protecting his life and his finances behind the scenes. We medical staff can only guide you through the systems. We cannot act as your surrogate to run your personal life. Miss Davis's words shattered the very foundations of David's arrogance. Mr. Miller, the only person you ever truly needed to thank all this time was never the hospital or the insurance system. It was your ex-wife. After the call ended, David broke down sobbing loudly, but there was no one there to rub his back anymore. At that precise moment, I was sitting in a quiet small cafe far away from the university hospital. In front of me were some documents prepared by my lawyer. With this, the division of assets and the separation of alimony are completely finalized. The legitimate, legally mandated amount from your joint accounts has been transferred directly to your personal account. Hearing my lawyer's calm voice, I bowed my head deeply. Thank you very much. Thanks to you, I can safely start my new life. I took a sip of hot black tea. The fog in my heart had completely cleared, leaving behind an incredibly serene peace. You made an incredibly wise decision, the lawyer said, sliding the documents back into his briefcase. Given his condition, your ex-husband will require severe round-the-clock care very soon. If you had remained married out of a misplaced sense of guilt, you would have been legally and financially bound to him as his caregiver for the rest of your life. You would have lost everything. I looked out the window at the people walking by. I did not leave quietly or sign the divorce papers without fighting for alimony because I was running away. It was the most calculating, silent, fail-proof defense mechanism to permanently sever all legal ties with him. I rushed the paperwork while he was drunk on the illusion of his new affair, ensuring that by the time he realized the truth, he would be legally incapable of dragging me down with him. That was my final decision after 22 years of being treated as an unpaid medical servant. Mom, are you done? The cafe door opened and Emily walked in with a bright smile. Yes, I just finished. Thanks for waiting. The two of us walked side by side down the local shopping street, buying groceries for dinner, laughing about silly, trivial things. A beautifully normal, mundane daily life that I now cherished more than anything else in the world. That night, David was huddled alone in his empty condo. Whether it was a side effect of the wrong pills or the progression of his disease, his body would not stop shaking. With trembling hands, he opened the old medication log that Sarah had left behind. He was desperate to find even the slightest clue about what he should take. As he flipped through the pages, a loose slip of paper slid out. It was a note Sarah had prepared to hand to Dr. Harrison at the next appointment. Written in her meticulous handwriting was the following: "The patient is completely unaware, but new symptoms have begun to surface this week. I suspect this is the sign that the disease is progressing to its next stage." David gasped for air. Progressing to the next stage. It was a cruel reality he never wanted to know, and a reality he absolutely could not handle alone. The only reason he could pretend to be a strong man was because Sarah absorbed all that terror herself, shielding him so he never had to face it. David's eyes fell on the existence of the blue folder beneath that note. It was the original copy of the true medical records Sarah had kept for 22 years. The definitive stack of evidence he would have to face in Dr. Harrison's office tomorrow. "This is the true record of your life." Dr. Harrison's low voice echoed in the dead silence of the exam room. In the center of the desk sat the thick blue folder. It was the original 22-year diary that Sarah had mailed to the clinic yesterday. The following afternoon, David had practically crawled his way to the waiting room of Chicago Memorial Hospital. Chloe was nowhere to be found. After leaving that note last night, she had vanished completely. With no family to rely on and no one to call, David took a taxi alone to get here. Every time he breathed, a nauseating was rattled deep in his chest. He could not even walk straight without clinging to the handrails in the hallway. Sitting in the waiting room chairs, looking around, David finally realized something. A wife pushing a wheelchair, a daughter holding a stack of insurance papers guiding her father. Everywhere he looked, there were patients clinging desperately to life with the physical support of someone who loved them. Until today, David had looked down on these people. "I am not like those sick invalids. I walk under my own power. I am a strong, successful man in society." But that was only because Sarah carried all the crushing weight on her back, hiding the reality of his illness from his sight. Thrown out into the open with nothing to protect him, David was the most pathetic, powerless person in that entire waiting room. When his name was called and he entered the exam room, his face was the color of ash. Dr. Harrison did not seem surprised to see him in this state. He knew exactly what happened to a patient when their medication management collapsed and panic set in. "Mr. Miller, what happened?" The doctor's bureaucratic question made David's lips tremble. "She ran away once she found out how serious my illness was." He tried to laugh at himself, but his facial muscles barely twitched. Dr. Harrison did not say a word. He simply placed his hand on the blue folder on his desk. "Your ex-wife entrusted the original copy of this to me." The doctor slowly opened the cover. The edges of the folder were frayed from years of use, the pages bulging with sticky notes. "Mr. Miller, you honestly believed you were suppressing your disease through your own willpower and physical strength, did you not?" Dr. Harrison's eyes reflected an unforgiving truth. But if you look at this record, you will see how comically delusional that was. The doctor flipped to a specific page, records from 10 years ago. "This was right when you were promoted to vice president of sales and were flying all over the country." David held his breath. Back then, he bragged that he could cure his illness with pure grit, coming home drunk almost every night. He wanted to prove to everyone and to Sarah that he was a strong, untouchable man. Severe palpitations and extreme sweating observed. "The patient insists it is just the alcohol, but it is clearly a side effect. Starting tomorrow, reduce sodium in his breakfast to 0 and delay his morning medications by 30 minutes to observe." "That is your ex-wife's meticulous handwriting," Dr. Harrison read aloud. "To protect his pride, I must heavily disguise the lack of salt using herb broths so he doesn't notice he is on a strict sodium restriction." David froze in his chair. The meals he used to complain about, yelling, "This food tastes completely bland." Sarah had stayed awake all night researching recipes and boiling broths for hours just to hide the fact that she was actively saving his life through his diet. Records from 5 years ago. Dr. Harrison turned the page without mercy. "The night you were rushed to the ER. The next morning you laughed, saying, 'It is just overwork. I will be fine after a nap.'" An unpleasant sweat dripped down David's forehead. Doctor's explanation. the patient was one step away from a fatal cardiovascular event. Because the patient is incapable of accepting reality, I will convey the severity of his condition to him gradually. I will protect him so he does not fall into despair. I will absolutely protect him. The moment he saw those words, a sharp, piercing pain as if a spike had been driven into his chest ran through David. Sarah understood everything. His vanity, his arrogance, his false bravado. She accepted it all. She understood his pathetic, hidden terror of the disease better than anyone, and willingly dragged herself through the mud to protect him so he could continue living inside his illusion of being a strong man. Mr. Miller, Dr. Harrison closed the folder. The sound carried the heavy weight of completely negating David's past existence. You were never fighting your illness. The doctor's words sliced through the freezing air of the exam room. The one fighting your illness was your wife. You simply lived inside a sterilized bubble she built for you, confusing yourself with someone strong. David covered his face with both hands. Taking care of me is your duty. You are a nurse. You are used to it. The countless insults he had hurled at her now flew back at him like a barrage of terrifying poisoned arrows. What he had joyfully thrown away for the sake of his freedom was not just a wife, he had thrown away his own life. And I have one more piece of brutal news for you. Dr. Harrison looked at the latest lab results in front of him. Just as Sarah's note predicted, a definitive change that David had not noticed was devastating his body. Your disease has progressed to the next stage. David's head snapped up. The next stage. Until now, you were able to be managed at home exclusively because you had round-the-clock intensive monitoring by your ex-wife. Dr. Harrison delivered the verdict without a hint of sympathy. But you no longer have a caregiver. Skipping your medications or abandoning your dietary restrictions will result in immediate fatal consequences. Home care while living alone is no longer an option for you. David's vision went pitch black. Then what am I supposed to do? You must be admitted to an inpatient facility. The doctor paused. However, the beds at Chicago Memorial Hospital are strictly reserved for acute critical patients. We cannot accept a long-term admission for a patient who has absolutely no family support. You will have to find a transfer hospital or enter a skilled nursing facility. Skilled nursing facility. The words struck David's skull like a sledgehammer. Just a few days ago, he believed he was embarking on a glamorous new life with his young mistress, celebrating his ultimate freedom. Now he was a lonely, severely ill elderly man abandoned by his family, destined to be institutionalized, and the sole absolute cause of it all was his own unparalleled arrogance. To initiate the transfer protocols or facility placement, we require a legally authorized guarantor. Dr. Harrison moved on to the administrative facts. Are there any relatives you can contact? Relative, his sister Susan's face popped into David's mind, but he knew better than anyone that she would never take care of him. She had only believed in his fake persona, using him as a source of pride for having a successful older brother. There was only one person left. David's trembling hand gripped the smartphone in his pocket, his daughter Emily. There was no way she would forgive a father who kicked out her mother and showed off a mistress. But right now, David had literally nothing else to cling to. I will call my daughter. Forcing the words out of his hoarse throat, David dragged himself out of the exam room. Walking out into the hallway, the chatter of the other patients sounded like events from a completely different universe. Collapsing onto a bench in the hospital courtyard, David unlocked his smartphone screen, staring at the name Emily. Tears of absolute regret welled up in his eyes. But those tears would do absolutely nothing to save him. With a shaking finger, he pressed the call button. The ringtone echoed hollowly in the quiet courtyard. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. The terror that she might never answer made his heart hammer violently. Then, after the 4th ring, the call connected. Hello. The voice coming from the speaker was his daughter's ice-cold and completely calm. David had no idea how brutally the last lifeline he tried to grab was about to reject him. Hello. The voice coming from the phone was surprisingly icy and calm. David shivered in the cold wind of the courtyard and pressed the phone tighter against his ear. Emily, it is Dad. I am at the hospital right now, and David did not know how to start. The absolute authority he used to wield as the patriarch of the house had completely vanished. I know Mom left, and actually Chloe left me today too. David tried to play the victim, softening his voice. The hospital is telling me I am in trouble because I do not have a legal guarantor. Emily, could you make some time? And you are just asking me to replace Mom. Emily's freezing voice cut him off. Her tone was not filled with anger, but with absolute profound disgust. No, it is not that. I just need you to sign some papers and help me with some administrative things. Dad, you really do not understand anything, do you? Emily let out a small, tired sigh. Did you really think I did not know about Mom's blue folder? David's heart skipped a beat. Did you think I did not know how Mom used to stay awake, terrified? Rubbing your back every time your breathing got weird in the middle of the night. Every single word Emily spoke hit David's chest like a heavy stone. You always bragged about being a strong man. You called her care your duty and never thanked her once. David was speechless. His daughter had been watching him the entire time, seeing her father strut around the house acting important while her mother exhausted her body and soul to keep him alive behind the scenes. You were not fighting a disease, Dad. You were just being protected by Mom. It was the same brutal truth Dr. Harrison had just handed him in the exam room. Emily, please, you are the only one I have left. David finally pleaded, casting aside his last ounce of pride, but Emily's resolution was unshakable. I never want Mom to sacrifice herself for you again, and I am not going to throw my own life away just to protect your vanity. It was a silent, absolute rejection. Do not contact us ever again. The call cut off with a soulless electronic beep. David slumped onto the courtyard bench, the trust and love of his own daughter. He had spent years actively destroying those two. With shaking fingers, David went through his contacts one last time. The only person left was his sister Susan. Maybe she would still look up to him as her successful older brother and bail him out. Clinging to his last shred of hope, he dialed. Oh, David, what is wrong? It is rare to hear from you. After a few rings, Susan's cheerful voice echoed. David quickly explained the situation. He finalized the divorce with Sarah. His mistress ran away, and the hospital was forcing him into a skilled nursing facility, which meant he desperately needed a legal guarantor. Sarah divorced you? What? At first, Susan feigned outrage, taking David's side, abandoning my sick brother. Unbelievable. I am going to give her a piece of my mind. No, I cannot even contact Sarah anymore. David panicked. More importantly, Susan, please be my guarantor. The facility won't accept me without a family member's signature. The moment she heard those words, the air on the other end of the line turned unnaturally freezing. Guarantor. Wait a second, David. The cheerful tone completely vanished from Susan's voice. My copay assistance expired, so just my medications could cost $10,000 a month. Plus, someone needs to manage the pill schedule and be the emergency contact for crisis. I cannot do it alone. When David laid out the honest truth, Susan let out an obvious groan of disgust. Are you kidding me? I have my own life to live. I cannot afford to pay thousands of dollars for you. I will pay for it with my savings. I just need you to sign the papers and be the emergency contact. No way. I am not going to deal with getting woken up by hospital calls in the middle of the night. Susan's words were the exact same brutal reality David had forced Sarah to endure for decades. Besides, this is all your fault for treating Sarah like garbage, isn't it? David could not believe his ears. You were the one who was always bad-mouthing Sarah. You called her a useless wife. I only said that because you kept saying it. So, I was just agreeing with you, Susan retorted without a shred of guilt. Look, I am really busy right now, so I have to go. Figure it out yourself. The call abruptly disconnected and the screen went black. David was now completely and absolutely alone. The only reason the people around him had treated him like a respectable man was not because he had inherent value. It was because Sarah had shielded him from all the messy, dirty, and heavy responsibilities, hiding them from the world. The armor of vanity he had worn so proudly shattered the moment Sarah disappeared. All that was left was a sick, powerless, elderly man that no one would take responsibility for. At exactly the same time, I was sitting in Emily's apartment, drinking a cup of hot tea after dinner. A comedy show was playing on the TV, filling the room with bright laughter. Suddenly, my smartphone buzzed on the table. The screen displayed an unsaved number. I kept my eyes on the screen and took a sip of tea. I did not need to answer to know who was calling. It was probably Susan. David must have begged her for help, and now she was calling to try and force all the responsibility back onto me. In the past, I would have answered the phone trembling, forced to endure her unreasonable anger. But I simply swiped the screen and tapped block caller. "What is it, Mom?" Emily asked curiously. "Oh, nothing, just a spam call." I smiled and turned my eyes back to the TV. No one from that family would ever threaten my daily life again. I had completely reclaimed my own life, the safest place in the world. When night had fully fallen, David dragged his heavy feet back to his new condo. He opened the door, but not a single sound greeted him. The dark, freezing living room, the stagnant air on the coffee table, the mountain of pill bottles he had violently thrown the night before, was exactly as he had left it. There was no dinner waiting for him. There was no one to ask him how he felt. David collapsed onto the sofa. Every time he breathed, a nauseating pain erupted in his chest, and the tremors in his right hand were much worse than yesterday. With shaking fingers, he tried to gather the scattered pill bottles, but he still had no idea what to take, when to take it, or how much to take. His lifeline had been severed by his own hands a long time ago. Staring at the brutal truth hidden behind his ego, David could do nothing but tremble at the encroaching terror of the night. In the dark, silent room, the only thing he could rely on was about to emit a merciless sound. Beep beep! It is time for your medication. The robotic electronic alarm echoed in the pitch-black living room. It was 9:00 p.m. The medication alarm set on David's smartphone was one of the countless alarms Sarah had obsessively configured, so he would never miss a dose. David remained huddled on the sofa, grabbing his smartphone with trembling hands. The screen read, "Sleep medications. If palpitations occur, add rescue inhaler pills." But right in front of him was an untouched mountain of pharmacy bottles. He had no idea which bottle was his sleep medication and which was the rescue pill. Reading the back of the bottles only gave him complex pharmaceutical names. He had no idea how to match them to his current symptoms. His breathing became ragged, and his heart hammered violently against his ribs in an irregular rhythm. David tore open a blister pack and took out a white tablet. Just as he brought it to his mouth with a glass of water, Dr. Harrison's icy warning flashed in his mind. Interrupting or altering this regimen based on your own amateur judgment carries the risk of triggering a fatal cardiovascular attack. David froze. What if this was the wrong pill? What if this single tablet was the one that imposed a fatal burden on his already weakened heart? Pure terror coursed through his veins. David spat the half-dissolved pill out onto the carpet. Gasp. "Wheeze, it hurts! Help me! Someone pick the right pill for me." Staring at the white tablet dissolving on the floor, David realized he was completely in checkmate. Money and status could not save him. Now what he desperately needed was an absolute ally, someone who understood his life better than he did and managed it for free without asking for anything in return. And he had thrown that single ally away, calling her a burden. David crawled across the floor, desperately gripping his smartphone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Sarah's name. There was no pride or vanity left. Begging her was the only path he had left to survive. He pressed the call button and a long ringtone echoed. She might not answer. She probably blocked me. The sweat of pure boss desperation poured down his face. But after the fifth ring, the call connected. Yes, it was Sarah's voice. Incredibly calm and hauntingly quiet. "Sarah, it's me. Please help me," David cried out, his voice cracking into a pathetic hoarse sob. "I do not know what pills to take. I do not know what to do at the hospital tomorrow. I do not know anything. Chloe left me." The other end of the line was dead silent. She did not sound angry. She did not sound scared. It was just silence. "I was wrong. I am so sorry for saying taking care of me was your duty. Just please come back." I cannot survive without you. David whimpered, begging for forgiveness. After a long pause, Sarah spoke in a hauntingly soft voice. I never abandoned you. That single sentence made David's breathing stop. For 22 years, no matter how much you refused to thank me, no matter how many times you called it my duty, I never abandoned you to your illness. Sarah's voice was crystal clear. But you abandoned me as your wife a long time ago, didn't you? David could not retort. To protect his illusion of being a strong man fighting a disease, he had ignored her suffering and chased after a younger woman. That past now stood before him like an impenetrable towering wall. If you need medical support, please consult the hospital social workers or a local care facility. All the information you need is written in that blue folder, Sarah said, delivering her final absolute farewell. But I will no longer include my life in your treatment plan. Goodbye, David. Beep. The soulless dial tone echoed in the room. Still holding the phone to his ear, David let out a voiceless scream. Sarah had not taken revenge. She had simply returned the responsibilities she carried to their rightful owner. Take responsibility for your own life. That completely obvious reality was a hell far worse than any punishment for David. At that moment, I stepped out onto the balcony of Emily's apartment, letting the night breeze wash over me. Even after hanging up the phone, my hands were not trembling. I felt no anger, no sadness, no triumphant joy of victory. All I felt was the profound relief of finally finishing an incredibly exhausting decades-long shift. Mom, are you going to catch a cold? Emily gently draped a cardigan over my shoulders. I turned to her and smiled softly. Thank you. But somehow I do not feel cold at all. A beautiful half-moon hung in the sky. I could imagine exactly how much he was suffering in that condo right now. If I went to him, I could easily save him. But I will never move again. If I saved him, he would simply misinterpret it and think she came back because I am a man of value, and I would instantly go back to being a convenient machine meant to keep him alive. I completely let go of his hand so I could finally live my own life. The next morning, David was found collapsed on the floor of his condo by the building manager. The manager had come to knock on the door regarding a payment issue and noticed something was wrong through a partially open window. An ambulance was called, but when the paramedics arrived, the scene was total chaos. David was drifting in and out of consciousness, completely unable to name the medications he was taking. The coffee table was just a mess of unopened pill bottles. When they asked for an emergency contact, he deliriously muttered over and over, "There is no one." Finding a receiving hospital proved incredibly difficult. A patient with a rare complex illness, an unknown treatment history, and absolutely no family member available to authorize consent. Inside the noisy ambulance fading into darkness, David could only think of one thing. When Sarah was here, this never happened. Even when he had a massive attack, she had everything prepared. She gave precise instructions to the paramedics, and the hospital admitted him instantly. That flawlessly smooth daily life was an absolute miracle she had been orchestrating behind the scenes. How could I have been so incredibly stupid? Intoxicated by his freedom, he had kicked out the zookeeper keeping him safe inside the cage, and had thrown himself unarmed into a wilderness full of wild beasts. The sound of the ambulance siren faded away. David's vision slowly sank into pitch blackness. He finally realized, paying with his own life, that the nagging wife he had looked down on for 22 years was actually his absolute unquestionable God. David's vision slowly began to focus on an unfamiliar, slightly yellowed white ceiling, the sharp, cheap smell of generic hospital antiseptic. From the next bed he heard the heavy wet cough of a stranger. This was not the pristine, quiet, private suite of Chicago Memorial Hospital he was used to. It was a crowded, noisy six-bed ward in a public hospital, separated only by thin curtains. Multiple IV lines were hooked up to his arms, and a dull ache shot through him when he tried to move. "You are awake." A young, exhausted-looking doctor pulled back the curtain and looked at him. It was a face he did not recognize. It was not a polite, accommodating, attending physician like Dr. Harrison, who treated him with care. "Beep, where am I?" David croaked. "Cook County General Hospital ER. You were brought in last night after your building manager called 911. The young doctor did not look up from his tablet, answering in a monotone voice. You barely made it because you skipped your specialized medications. You were one step away from full cardiac arrest. The doctor's words chilled David's blood. Transfer me to Chicago Memorial Hospital. I am a lifelong patient there. David tried desperately to project authority, but his voice had no power. The young doctor shot him an icy glare. Impossible. We contacted Chicago Memorial, but they rejected the transfer because you do not have a legal proxy to consent to admission. That reality crushed David's chest. We are an acute care trauma center. Once you are stabilized, we have to discharge you immediately. However, it is physically impossible for you to live alone in your current state. You will have to find a transfer facility or enter a state F-funded nursing home. The doctor dropped the brutal truth and quickly walked away. David lay paralyzed, staring at the dirty ceiling. He was no longer a man of status who deserved special treatment from society. He was just a problematic elderly patient with no family. That reality shattered the last fragments of his arrogant soul. A little while later, an older woman in an administrative uniform approached his bed. She carried a clipboard with several documents. "Mr. Miller, do you have a moment?" The billing administrator's voice was polite, but her eyes were completely void of warmth. "This is the preliminary estimate for your ER transport and stabilization in the ICU last night." She held a piece of paper in front of David's face. Seeing the number printed at the bottom, David gasped. $1,000 for a single night of emergency care. He received a bill that far exceeded his wildest imagination. "Wait, I am approved for a COA assistance program and insurance waivers," David stammered, his voice trembling. The administrator silently shook her head. "Your prior authorization expired last week. Because the renewal was never processed, we have no choice but to bill this to your standard deductible and out-of-pocket maximum." The renewal process, the one Sarah always handled perfectly. Quietly visiting government offices and making endless phone calls without a single complaint. "We expect your bill to increase significantly by the time you are discharged. Do you have any relatives who can act as a financial guarantor?" David could not answer. His sister Susan had already rejected him. Chloe fled the second. She realized the severity of his illness and the wife who protected him for 22 years. He had kicked her out with his own hands. "I have no one," David managed to say. The administrator let out a deep sigh. "I see, then we will require payment in full prior to your discharge." She coldly left the papers on his tray table and walked away. David clutched the bill with shaking hands. If this continued, his bank accounts would be completely emptied in a matter of months. Once his money ran out, he would not be able to afford proper treatments, and he would not even be able to afford a decent nursing home. Even the financial wealth he believed was proof of his own success was simply a fragile illusion built upon Sarah's flawless management. On the small nightstand were his personal belongings they had brought with him. Among them was his smartphone. David unlocked the screen, clinging to a desperate prayer. Maybe someone is worried about me. Maybe Sarah changed her mind and rushed to the hospital. But there was only a single notification on the screen. A short text message from his daughter Emily. David opened the message with a trembling finger. Written in ruthless, perfect text was the following. "The hospital called me. I am not going. You were not fighting a disease, Dad. You were just being protected by Mom. Do not contact us ever again." The moment he read those words, the last pillar of his ego completely collapsed. He could not scream. He could not cry out loud. He simply stared at the screen, completely speechless. His hands shook violently and the smartphone slipped from his grasp, falling onto the sheets. David slowly looked away and stared back up at the yellowed ceiling. Cold tears ran silently down his cheeks. Regret was completely useless. Now, what he had lost was not just his family. He had lost the only person who forgave his arrogance, wrapped up his weaknesses, and tethered him to life itself, the only truly safe place in the whole world. "I am finally free." The day he stamped the divorce papers, He had laughed and said those exact words. But the true freedom he won was lying in this freezing, lonely hospital bed, with absolutely no one to reach out a hand to save him. Crying in silence, David sank into a bottomless, endless despair. Around the same time, I was standing in the kitchen of Emily's apartment, bathed in the morning sunlight, preparing lunch, the bright yellow of scrambled eggs, and the vibrant green of a spinach salad. Looking at the healthy food naturally made my heart skip. Today was my first day at my new job. I had left the exhausting battlefield of being a floor-charge nurse at a hospital and had accepted a part-time position at a small neighborhood clinic. The salary was lower, but I no longer had to dread night shifts, and I no longer had to carry the crushing responsibility of keeping someone alive all by myself. "Good morning, Mom," Emily stumbled out, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Good morning, breakfast is ready." Emily smiled at the sight of the hot bowl of oatmeal on the table. "Mom, your complexion looks so much better lately." I touched my cheek. "Yes, probably because I am finally sleeping well." Just then, Emily's smartphone buzzed. For a fraction of a second, her expression hardened. It was probably a call from the hospital or someone related to David, but Emily immediately flipped the phone face down, ignoring it completely. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Emily looked me straight in the eyes. "It is nothing, just spam." Her strong gaze conveyed an unwavering resolution not to be dragged back into the past. I nodded slightly and did not ask anything else. We ate breakfast together in peace. A bright morning news program played on the TV. Outside the window, a flawless blue sky stretched endlessly. Drinking my tea, I looked at the small potted peperomia on the balcony. My days of sacrificing myself for someone else were over. I was going to walk my own life on my own 2 feet. That quiet resolution seeped into every corner of my body, as warm as the tea in my hands. The clock ticked, and it was time to leave. I put on my new shoes and grabbed the doorknob. The life waiting for me belonged to me, and no one could ever steal it away again. Pushing open the door to the new clinic, I was not hit by the harsh smell of medical bleach, but by the faint, calming scent of aromatherapy. "Good morning, Sarah. I am sorry to ask on your first day, but could you help out at the reception this morning?" A kind clinic director and smiling staff members. There was no suffocating tension or bloodthirsty yelling like in the trauma center. I changed into my new scrubs and sat at my desk. The soft morning sunlight filtered through the windows. Until now, my mornings were a countdown of someone else's life, checking blood pressure, temperature, skin color, and my husband's breathing patterns. Living in the crushing terror that any slight abnormality would be blamed entirely on my incompetence, but now I could feel the hands of the clock tick by peacefully. I even had the luxury of smiling at the patients walking in and saying, "What a beautiful day, isn't it?" An elderly patient took the clipboard I handed him and smiled. "Thank you, nurse. You have a kind face." That casual, spontaneous comment spread a warm glow deep in my chest. For the first time in 22 years, I felt I had regained the true joy of being a nurse. Meanwhile, David lay on a hard bed in the general ward, staring blankly at the stained ceiling. Days had passed and his physical condition had somewhat stabilized. But the despair consuming his soul only deepened day by day. The doctors on their rounds, the nurses taking his vitals, none of them looked at him like the prosperous, respectable executive he believed himself to be. To them, he was just a problematic elderly patient without a family, a box to check on their daily rounds. "Mr. Miller, here are your medications for today. Make sure to take them," a nurse said, dropping a paper cup of pills on his tray table before immediately rushing off to the next bed. No one adjusted the temperature of his water so the pills would go down easier. No one rubbed his wrist to check for tremors, nor asked him how he felt. With trembling hands, David took the pills, choking on the ice-cold tap water. The time when Sarah used to gently rub his back and help him swallow, his medication was lost forever eternally. In the afternoon, a medical social worker he had never seen before visited his bed. "Mr. Miller, we need to discuss your next steps." She opened her clipboard and fired off the brutal reality with a robotic administrative tone. "You cannot stay in this hospital for much longer." Since you do not have a financial guarantor, we will have to utilize state assistance programs to transfer you to an underfunded public nursing facility for people without families. What about my condo? David asked with a hoarse voice. We strongly recommend initiating the sale of your property to cover your outstanding medical debts and the facility admission fees. You should assume you will have almost no assets left once this is over. His condo, his freedom, his youth, his dignity, everything he tried to buy by throwing Sarah away had vanished like a mirage. He tried calling his sister Susan countless times, but it always went straight to voicemail. She had probably blocked his number. Chloe had not reached out once since she left. What she wanted was a rich man with money to spend who would pamper her, not an elderly man with a severe illness, zero assets, and the need for a caregiver. She had easily moved on to find her next glamorous lifestyle, erasing David from her memory as if he never existed. Suddenly, David's eyes fell on the blue folder sitting on his nightstand. It was the original medical diary Dr. Harrison had left to force him to face reality. David reached out an aching arm and pulled the folder closer. Opening the pages, he saw lines and lines of soft, considerate words dedicated entirely to protecting him. The patient tries to act tough but seems to be in pain. He has very little appetite today, so chop the vegetables very finely to make them easier to digest. Watch out for medication side effects. Always smile when talking to him so he doesn't get anxious. Tracing those letters with his fingers, David broke into unstoppable, endless sobs. He remembered the day he threw Sarah's precious potted plants into the trash. She did not say a single word of complaint. She simply swept up the dirt in silence. She did not stay silent because she was afraid of him. She stayed silent because she loved him deeply and profoundly, forgiving the weakness of a man terrified by his own illness. He suffered from a disease, but at the same time, he was more deeply and truly loved and protected than anyone else in the world. He had looked down on the only person in the universe who understood him and had destroyed her with his own arrogance. No matter how much he cried, no matter how much he apologized, those warm, mundane days would never ever return. Clutching the blue folder to his chest, David continued to cry silently in his lonely hospital bed. The seasons were about to change. On the balcony of my small apartment, the peperomia Emily and I bought was sprouting vibrant new green leaves. One Sunday morning, I was taking my time brewing coffee in the kitchen. The sound of the beans grinding and the quiet drip of the hot water were the only sounds in the room. "Mom, it smells like coffee." Emily stumbled into the living room, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. I bought some really good beans as a special treat today." I placed 2 mugs on the table and sat across from Emily. The TV was off. We simply sat there enjoying the aroma of the coffee and the pleasant breeze coming through the window. In the past, doing absolutely nothing like this would have filled me with intense guilt. I was trapped by the curse that if I stopped moving, my husband's life would be in danger. I constantly had to be on alert, constantly running. But right now, this total silence felt like the greatest reward in the world. "Mom," Emily said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "You never have to carry someone else's life by yourself again." Her words reached the deepest part of my heart. As gentle as a spring breeze, I gave a small smile and nodded slowly. "You are right. I feel like I can finally truly breathe." I stopped grinding my own soul to keep someone else alive. Some people might call me heartless. Some might point fingers and say, I abandoned my duty as a wife, but I will no longer be bound by those words. I reclaimed my own life before being someone's lifeline. I am a human being who deserves to live in peace. Outside the window, an endless, flawless blue sky stretched out. Faintly in the distance, I could hear the chirping of birds. I took a sip of hot coffee silently, savoring the absolute miracle of a normal, happy life. People cannot live on medicine alone. The mundane daily life that someone silently supports behind the scenes is truly the greatest miracle. One we only recognize once it is gone. Thank you all for sticking with this story until the end. As I followed this journey, I found myself constantly asking what it truly means to support someone. What Sarah did for 22 years was not just organizing pills or driving to the hospital. It was catching the invisible changes in his body, recording the signs of a crisis, communicating accurately with doctors, navigating complex insurance systems, and desperately holding on to his life so it wouldn't slip through the cracks of daily life. However, her husband saw all that devotion not as love but as an obligatory duty. This story is not just about a severe illness or a divorce. What it truly represents is the fact that the normal lives we take for granted are almost always protected by the invisible labor of someone else. Having pills ready time, remembering doctor's appointments, having someone who notices when you feel sick, none of that happens by magic. It was something Sarah protected piece by piece, sacrificing her own time and her own soul. Sometimes when people are supported for so long, they become blind to the massive presence right beside them. They get so used to the help that gratitude is replaced by a toxic entitlement of "this is how it should be." But kindness and devotion are never infinite resources. If you continue to exploit someone's love, forcing them to sacrifice their own life for yours, eventually you will not just lose their help. You will lose their trust, their bond, and even the future where they are by your side. Sarah did not abandon her husband for 22 years. She never abandoned him once. Even without gratitude, even when she was called a burden, she protected his life. But in the end, before completely losing herself, she chose to step down from that role. That was not a heartless decision. It was a necessary choice to protect her own humanity. If you were in Sarah's shoes and the husband you supported for 22 years begged you for help, would you go back, or would you say, "I will no longer include my life in your treatment plan," and choose your own path? Let us know your thoughts and feelings in the comments section below. Also, is there someone in your life who quietly supports you without asking for praise? If someone comes to mind, please tell them thank you while you still can. Thank you so much for the countless warm comments you always leave. We read and value every single one of them. If this story left an impression on your heart, we would be thrilled if you left a like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, we will see you in another story that makes us reflect on family bonds and what truly matters in life. In the medical diary Sarah left behind, there was not a single word blaming her husband. All she wrote were medication schedules, physical changes, considerations for his hidden pain, and gentle reminders so he would not push himself too hard. Every time he looks at those words, he will be violently reminded of just how deeply he was actually protected. Meanwhile, Sarah no longer carries someone else's life. She has begun to live her own. Those who support others have the right to rest. Even when you love someone, you have the right to protect yourself. And gratitude is not something you feel and regret after it is gone. It is something you must say out loud while they are still by your side. May there come a moment in your days when you realize the invisible kindness hiding in plain sight. Thank you again for watching until the